Welcome everyone to MITEI Presents, Making Massachusetts the World's Climate Innovation Laboratory. My name is Bill Green. I'm the director of the MIT Energy Initiative, and I want to thank you all for coming tonight. The MIT Energy Initiative is the hub for energy transition research, education, and outreach at MIT. And as part of MITEI's commitment to identifying low and zero carbon energy solutions and increasing access to reliable, affordable energy, we bring leaders from industry, government, nonprofits, and academia to campus to discuss innovations and ideas about how to accelerate the energy transition. So today, one of those speakers is here with us today is Emily Reichart. Emily is the CEO of the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. MassCEC was created in 2008. It's the state's economic development agency dedicated to accelerating the growth of the clean energy sector in Massachusetts. It creates jobs, delivers environmental benefits, and is helping to secure the long-term economic growth for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Emily has been the CEO of MassCEC since 2023. Before joining MassCEC, Emily was for many years the CEO of Greentown Labs, one of the leading climate tech incubators for startups in North America, and a very good partner to MIT for many years. Emily holds a PhD in physical chemistry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she's also an MIT alumna, having earned an MBA at the Sloan School. Please join me in welcoming Emily back to campus.
All right, well, thank you, Bill, so much for having me. And it is definitely fun to be back on the MIT campus. As was just mentioned, I am a Sloan Fellow, class of 2012. And I have to say the year 2011 to 2012 was one of the most just kind of enriching, emerged, like the drinking from the fire hose thing that they tell you about when you're at MIT. Just that is totally a true statement. So it was amazing to be here and always good to be back. So after the time that I was at MIT, of course, I moved into Greentown Labs, which was, as Bill said, the largest climate tech incubator in North America, and have been now at MassCEC, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, for about 2 years. Governor Healy was the one that recruited me kind of after my stint at Greentown Labs. And I have had the privilege of working on a climate tech economic development strategy for the state, which I will say more about all of those words in just a moment. I don't know if Martha Broad is here, maybe not, but she is a long time, early, I should say, MassCEC employee. I'd also like to introduce Jennifer LeBlond, who is sitting up here in the front row as our Managing Director of Climate Tech. So a lot of the work that I'm going to be talking about today is work that she and her team are spearheading. All right. So let me just start by introducing MassCEC. First of all, who has heard of the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center? Wow. This is a great crowd. I'm so impressed, so impressed. All right. Well, we're a quasi-government agency, which means we're within state government, but sitting a little bit outside of it. And we kind of report up into Energy and Environmental Affairs, which is a cabinet seat in the governor's cabinet. So what that quasi-status allows us to do is take on bigger, longer-term problems and be focused on innovation and economic development, which is our bread and butter. And when I say economic development, I just want to be clear, that's about supporting businesses, a lot of times small businesses or startups, and it's also about the jobs that those startups create. So I just know sitting back in my MIT head, I'd be going, economic development, like that just sounds like a government word, but it's really businesses and jobs anytime I say that. So we are a very unique agency. There's not another one in the country exactly like us, focused on innovation and economic development for clean energy and climate tech. And this is something that I think it's important to say we are a Massachusetts clean energy agency, which means we cover the entire state. So our job is, we love Boston, Cambridge, and all the startups and good activity that's going on here at MIT. But our job is really to help make that happen across the state. And I'll talk to you more about how we do that. So what does MassCEC do? Really 4 things. And I'll start up in the corner here with emerging climate tech. Emerging climate tech, that is really the startups and the activity around bringing new ideas out of the laboratory and into the world where they can have an impact, particularly on carbon emissions and being new climate tech innovations. So we provide grants, we provide internships, we have a small investment fund that we co-invest with a lot of different investors in the area. And we are increasingly focusing on kind of the longer term growth trajectory of these young companies that we hope not only will come out of places like MIT, but will stay and grow here. And that's our job as an economic development agency, is to keep the companies here and grow them here and create those jobs here. So we work on that. I would say that that is one aspect of what we do. The next, accelerating decarbonization, that's really about if you already have a climate technology or clean energy technology that is commercialized, how do you get it in as many homes and businesses as possible? So heat pumps, for example, electric vehicles and infrastructure to charge those electric vehicles. There are a lot of cases, I would say, in Massachusetts, because of our infrastructure being relatively old. We've got older buildings. We also have unique situations like triple deckers that it's not so standard as if every building in Massachusetts was a single family home with a driveway. So if you are trying to charge an electric vehicle and you don't have a garage, what do? So MassCEC is the agency that tries to figure that out and then comes up with a good solution, and then that is scaled by other agencies that may provide rebates or other, I'd say, barrier reducing type of support that allows that technology to be at scale at Massachusetts, reducing carbon emissions, which is, of course, the name of the game. All right, offshore wind, is another big area for Massachusetts. You may be aware of, there's been a lot about offshore wind in the news lately, but what I think you may not be aware of is that we have an offshore wind project being built right now off the coast of Massachusetts. There are going to be 62 turbines in the water. 40, some of those have already been brought into operation and are putting electrons on our grid right now. Ultimately, it'll be 400,000 homes that are powered by the clean energy that's being generated by offshore wind right off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. So MassCEC's role is to support the port infrastructure from which we marshal those offshore wind projects. So the other thing that I think is really important to know about our work in offshore wind is that we also support innovation that is needed to do all the things that support the offshore wind industry in general. For example, you need to monitor ocean conditions. You need to know, are there mammals in the area? What's the population or number of species that are being impacted if there's a construction project going on? And so we often provide funding support and actually have set up a network to do this kind of testing and evaluation really across the Commonwealth, the entire coastline. And if you want to look that up, it's our Ocean Innovation Network program. So if anyone in here is interested in marine science, engineering, sensors, please check that out. There are definitely interesting opportunities to collaborate. And finally, I'll just mention clean energy workforce development. So I mentioned we do internships. Anyone in here done a MassCEC internship? All right, there's one. We support interns over 3 different fall, spring, and summer semesters. This is the opportunity to work with a company or with another organization. We pay for the internship, and it gets you out there understanding the clean energy industry. We also do training of high school students, community college students, folk tech students, and students who are coming back for a second career in clean energy. So developing curriculum, funding community organizations who are doing this training, or schools that are doing this training, is a big part of our portfolio as well. So what I'd like to talk to you a bit about today, and I will be quick because I know I'm on a timer here, so we'll try to leave some time for questions. I want to talk to you a bit about why climate tech, and why climate tech for Massachusetts in particular. Many of you are probably aware that Massachusetts is a life sciences leader. Lots of life sciences companies here. In fact, 18 of 20 life sciences headquarters are located in Massachusetts. So we see climate tech, or rather the Healy-Driscoll administration sees climate tech as an opportunity like that we can take advantage of and really buoy up and just really accelerate, I should say, to become a real economic driver for the state. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So in order to get there, you not only need to have support from a policy perspective, but you really kind of need to have a plan. And so over the last year or so, we developed what we call our Climate Tech Economic Development Strategy and Implementation Plan. So a mouthful there. If you look up Mass DEC Climate Tech Plan, you'll probably find a link to this. But the idea is that we developed a 10-year strategy to do exactly what I just talked about. Instead of for life sciences, for climate tech, with some government support, but also working closely with the private sector. So before I go further, though, I think it's important to talk about what do we mean by climate tech, and this is in the report as well. So we see climate tech as really kind of two major buckets, so to speak. There is reducing emissions and carbon management as one piece, but then also we all recognize climate change is already here. So we need technologies that are going to have to help us adapt and be more resilient to address the effects of climate change that we're all already experiencing. So one example might be, and this is already happening, a technology that would be described in this way is one that is supporting reducing coastal erosion that, for example, the city of Boston is testing right now. So there's going to be a lot of change related to climate change, and we need to use technology to mitigate those effects and impacts. And so it's a very exciting area of climate tech. But this big, broad picture is how we define it. Now, I mentioned that we have decided as a state to go on climate tech, to really make a big play for leadership in climate tech. And so why would we do this? Well, when I again mentioned the life sciences example, 15 years ago, life sciences was in a similar place to where climate tech is right now. We had a fantastic ecosystem. We have more startups per capita than any other state. And there's a bunch of statistics up here which basically say we've got a lot of strength in this area already. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that MIT and MIT spin-outs have definitely played a big role in the numbers up here. So we're already strong. How can we make Massachusetts even stronger when it comes to climate tech economic development? I want to say here that these are basically looking at wanting to build on our strengths like we did with life sciences. This is kind of what ultimately we want to achieve with the strategy that I just talked about. So we think about, again, economic development is business, keeping businesses here, keeping them growing here. It's also about people and talent and jobs. And it's continuing the places that we're already strong. We are number one for R&D and innovation in climate tech. So we want to continue to support that as a state and really lean into this particular area. So the report that I mentioned really did an analysis of what are we good at right now in Massachusetts and where do we need to improve. And many of you who have taken classes here, probably in entrepreneurship, have seen some chart similar to this at some time. So we're looking at the life cycle of a young company that goes from starting early development, where it's research, moving through prototype validation, pilot scaling, and of course, full-scale deployment, a company that is at a large scale and probably international, global. What we focused on is understanding the strength that we have in each of these areas. So it turns out when we do the analysis, we're pretty good as an ecosystem in the very early parts. We've got obviously a university like this, but many other universities that are very strong in climate and clean energy. That is a big plus, and those are doing their job of spinning out some of that technology and research into startup companies that are then getting started, doing that proof of concept, doing the prototyping. That's a place at which you may need some support, early funding, seed funding, grant funding. Then they get to the point where they need to do a pilot, larger scale. We still support that pretty well within our ecosystem. And our ecosystem here in Massachusetts has a lot of investors who are specifically interested in this area, who work collaboratively with Mass CEC and other investors in order to support these companies. But then when it comes to scaling, we kind of need to think about what could we be doing differently to keep these companies here in Massachusetts and growing here. And so that's really what we have been thinking about and what this plan is all about. I think it's also important to just mention that when we did this study, we also interviewed a whole bunch of young companies to say, what is it that you think Massachusetts does well and is potentially missing? And whenever you look at that scaling stage, what comes up over and over is access to partners and customers, demonstration and testing sites, and of course, talent. And to just add on to that, space, a place to build out the facility and help it allow a place for the company to grow that is cost effective. So when you think about all of that, and you think about the fact that Mass CEC, our economic development agency focused on climate innovation, you have to look at this from the perspective of an entire state. And so we did that. And we looked at, okay, right now we're obviously up there in number 5, Greater Boston. And we know the strengths around here, right? Good venture capital community, good research institutions, lots of startups located here. But what can we do in the other regions, and what strengths might they have that we can build on and perhaps form, and in some cases they're already formed, clusters elsewhere in the Commonwealth where there are specific strengths. Like, for example, Southeast and Cape is an incredible location for anything that is ocean tech related, also resilience tech related, or adapt tech, as I've seen it called already. Whenever you look out west in the Berkshires, you have the beginnings of an agriculture cluster. In the middle of the state, you have quite a few startups who are working on batteries and recycling of batteries and regeneration. So each area we looked at to say, where could these different parts of the state, how could they contribute? And then also, if we know the things that we need are partners and customers, demonstration sites, talent, and space, how can we look at the entire state to be the answer to that? And we were able to identify organizations in each state. Hopefully MIT's logo is on here, but if it's not, I apologize. We were able to find organizations in each part of the state that are actively working in this climate tech area. And they may be an incubator, they might be a large company that's willing to do demonstration sites. They might be a university that has unique assets that perhaps are unutilized right now, but a startup company could be using them to do unique testing. So we have been working on cataloging all the different assets that we have around Massachusetts so that if you're a startup and you need to test at a real wastewater facility in situ, you can find a place to do that at UMass Amherst because that facility exists. I didn't know it existed until we did this research and this study to understand what is already out there and how can it support climate tech companies. The obvious thing you probably are thinking is, well, just don't they need money? And I didn't mention money because our state is not the biggest state. We don't have the most money, but I think what we do have is organization. We have amazing resources. We have a startup culture that already exists. We have investors. So what can we do to make it easier for startups, less expensive for startups to grow here in the Commonwealth? So I mentioned before partners and customers. You've got quite a few organizations up there, like a Schneider Electric would be one example, Saint-Gobain does building materials. These are potential partners for young companies. And then lots of different opportunities here for talent, whether that talent is doing assembly and manufacturing, maybe coming more out of a community college that's nearby, or can be talent that's coming out of universities that's bringing the technology with it. So what I want to say is there are assets and resources all over the state of Massachusetts that can be utilized by startups that may develop here at MIT. And we actually have a website that has all of this information on it as well. So we continue to catalog, but that's my general advertisement for how awesome Massachusetts is and why you should stay here. All right, and to kind of get close to wrapping here, yes, because I need to do that, I will just mention that something very important happened last fall now, and we are rolling out the programs that have to do with this legislation as we speak. Last year, there was a piece of legislation called the Mass Leads Act, and it actually put into place some of the tools that, say, the life sciences industry has had for many years at the Life Sciences Center. Now, Mass CEC has them as well. So, for example, we now have the ability to make capital investments, that's like equipment, facilities, et cetera, at a spend rate of up to $20 million a year. We also have tax incentives that are available of up to $30 million a year. And that is a 10-year plan. So it matches our economic development work or economic development report that I just shared with you. So this is the kind of money piece, how we do it, how we implement it. It also was where we defined in statute for the first time climate tech. So Massachusetts is the first state to do that. And this is what we hope to achieve. Again, this is a 10-year plan. But if I think about the number of companies that we've already worked with, I bet it's half of that number at least. In terms of jobs created, we already have an industry in Massachusetts in terms of clean energy that's 118,000 people strong. When you add climate tech on top of that, it is 163,000 already. So we need to continue to grow that industry and keep young companies here. And I believe we can get there. That's a 10-year goal. And then finally, in Mass CEC's track record, whenever we invest, so for example, the funding that I just shared with you was coming from the Mass Leads Act, provided to us by our wonderful Massachusetts legislature. When we invest those dollars, typically we get 7x return of that funding. So we can leverage a lot of other funding, whether it be from other private sources, public sources. It is within our track record that we'd be doing exactly that. And with that, I think I'm going to wrap up sort of on time. And I know there will be questions from Bill, and there may be questions from the audience. But just want to say, if you are doing a startup at MIT, I hope you will consider staying here because we've got a 10-year plan. And as you've seen, there's already a lot going on. And we can only make it stronger from here. So please come be part of it.
So maybe come join me.
Yep. I do not need this anymore. All righty.
Sorry, it's a little tall. Great. Well, thank you for that talk. I was really struck by the very last number you put up there, that you're trying to look for $7 of additional investment for every dollar you guys put in. I've never been in a situation giving out money like that, so I don't know what it's really like. But I was wondering how you can choose projects to judge whether that you'll be able to achieve that ratio.
Well, I'd say, well, there's a lot of ways to answer that question, but Mass CEC, when we give out, we mostly give out grants. So whenever we give out grant funds, oftentimes we're leveraging other sources of funding. So in the past, not too distant past, a lot of times this has been federal funding. So the feds might put in 7x what we might put in, or 3x what we might put in. The private sector is also an amazing partner. So that's something that we do quite frequently, is engage both with investors in the public sector, with large companies, in the private sector. And so I wouldn't say it's a function of the good ecosystem we have here. It is a function of partners who are also interested in this industry and are investing in it. And it's of course, whenever we're looking at many grant applications, which have really skyrocketed since things have changed at the federal level. The team has an incredibly detailed ranking process in order to select which of the companies we can allow to be granted funds.
Sounds like a fun event. I can imagine sitting at the table with all these excellent applications in front of you, trying to predict which of these are actually going to pay back for the taxpayers and
yeah,
the state.
It's definitely a challenging thing because you have a lot of factors in there. I mean, one of the things we do look at as a Massachusetts agency is what is going to be the economic development impact in Massachusetts. So if you're asking for funds because you've graduated from a local university, but you're saying, I'm going to do my demo project in New York or somewhere else, that's not as likely to get funded from us because we are trying to have companies who grow here and stay here.
Great. So you showed a lot of different companies on your chart. I was wondering if you could pick out maybe one or two of just really good success stories where you feel like something grew up in Massachusetts and actually is really delivering for the state.
Well, it's hard to, this used to happen to me at Greentown Labs as well, where it's kind of like you're picking your favorite of all your children. So I'm going to dodge the question just a little bit to say that we've had quite a few incredible stories come out of Massachusetts, whether it be electric hydrogen, whether it be Commonwealth fusion systems, Sublime systems. A lot of these have MIT roots, so you may have heard about them previously. AeroShield is a company that's doing windows with a particular type of coating that is also made in Massachusetts to be extra efficient. And kind of the list goes on. So I would say that we are very good at spinning out companies here. We are very good at those early stages where they are being supported by the local ecosystem, and we're working on the longer term, helping and supporting them there.
Great, thanks. So we here at MIT come up with a lot of the original ideas behind a lot of these companies. We have our own difficulties of choosing which of the funds, with the limited funds we have, and actually most of the funds we get are not actually controlled by us, but are by the federal government or by other sponsors outside of MIT. So the faculty all spend a lot of time trying to talk to those potential sponsors and persuade them that their idea is really the one that merits it. But then quite a lot of our faculty get to the point of becoming founders of companies, or their students become founders, and we start these companies up, and as you said, they can get funded initially by the local venture capital community. But a lot of times in energy, you need to build a pretty big scale before you can compete with the existing technologies. And that's tough for the venture capital community to raise that much money. And I guess it's just tough all around. I don't know if you have any comments about your thoughts about this, having seen it now for many years.
Yeah, well, I'd say that our strategy in Massachusetts has been to figure out, if we don't have that level of capital coming from us as a state, how can we help companies to do their processes, find their facilities, build their facilities, do their demonstrations, do their testing, find the talent? How can we kind of reduce the time, money barriers to all of that, and therefore make it as easy as possible and as inexpensive as possible for the company to stay here and grow here? In terms of the type of funding that is needed to scale climate tech, you can't beat around the bush. It's typically pretty significant. And certainly we had a partner previously in the federal government that we don't have at this moment. But I do think that there are still investments going on in terms of these larger scale projects. It's just different private sector or philanthropic resources stepping forward. What we're seeing in terms of investments is not that investments are not happening, but that they're taking a little more time than they previously have. And so I wouldn't say that people have decided, oh, climate tech is done or there's no more deals to be done. I think it's more that the deals that are being done are quite selective, but they are ultimately getting done.
You mentioned an issue that in Massachusetts is space. It seems like the regions where we have space, we don't have workforce. And where we have workforce, we don't have any space. I don't know if this has been like a conundrum for you to try to deal with.
Well, I think it depends on what workforce you need. So for example, some of the companies like Commonwealth Fusion Systems, Electric Hydrogen, that are kind of out in the middle of the state in Devens, for anyone who may be familiar with that town. It was a previous used a military base, and it's been totally reimagined, but it has a lot of power, so it's kind of great for these type of applications. They have been partnering with community colleges to be building up the talent that they need. And this is a strategy that many other industries have used over the years. And it requires pretty close coordination between academic institutions and the startups, which they aren't necessarily able to do until they get to a certain size, and then they know they need to do the assembly and the manufacturing pieces. I think we often think of startups as that original founding team, and maybe it's the scientist and the engineer, but pretty soon as you grow that, you need operations, you need marketing, you need all these finance, you need all these other things. And we live in a world now where you can be working from anywhere. So yes, there is maybe the R&D and the laboratory exists somewhere in a physical space, but a lot of the employees you're going to be hiring can be from, frankly, they can be from Massachusetts, or they can be much beyond Massachusetts. We hope they're from Massachusetts, but people, it's allowed. Actually, I think we've seen more young companies move further out of the Boston area because they feel more freedom, because they can get the talent, and they can also pay a lot less for a facility do their building up.
And there's room that they can expand.
And there's room. Yeah, room is a nice thing. We don't have much around we don't have much room around here to build things.
So earlier we were talking about Massachusetts has one energy resource that's really special. It's the offshore wind. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and about your involvement or knowledge of how MSCEC was involved in helping to foster that.
So I would say the state has had its eye on offshore wind, or really wind and offshore wind, for many years. It dates back to almost the beginning of Mass CEC, which was in 2008. Early on, there was a testing center built, the Wind Turbine Test Center. It's in Charlestown, Massachusetts, and that center is all about testing like giant wind blades to ensure that they can withstand that they can withstand winds and other stressors over a long period of time. So that testing center is actually in Massachusetts. It's the only one in North America. So it's a pretty unique asset, but I think it was built in around 2013. So I think it gives you an idea of how long this path has been going. We also built a port in that same time frame, the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal as a state. For several years, there was no actual wind projects going on yet. Some of you may remember Cape Wind, which was around 2012 and maybe didn't end up happening. But we had the facility to do it when we were ready. And so when the projects started coming, Massachusetts was ready with a port that had significant deep water, because that's an important thing for landing the type of crafts that you need in order to bring wind blades to shore, where they are assembled and then they are moved offshore again. So we built the port, and then we were ready with the ability through, actually it was Governor Baker at that time, was the one that I think put the first offshore wind contracts into place. And since then, it's been about marshaling. And so we have the port where the project is being built, and that work continues every single day. We've got a staff at Mass CEC that's down in New Bedford, and we are also looking at building a port further north in Salem as the industry picks back up, which we imagine will happen within a couple of years.
Maybe we can take some questions from the audience.
The biggest problem is employing. The biggest problem to bring the most talent is housing. In today's times, this is very important, especially for the young families and everything.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Housing. Family need the affordable housing. What you propose to the young talent that you can buy house, buy apartment for really affordable price?
So I'd say a couple things. I know that both the governor and some of our bigger cities are really actively working on new types of models, whether it's taking an older office building and converting it into housing, or in a recent housing bond bill, it was permitted now to have ADUs, which is an auxiliary dwelling unit, which wasn't previously available in Massachusetts as an option. So I think there's pieces here that we can do right away. There's also, I think, an option not to live right in the downtown Boston area, but move a little further afield. And there is, I'd say, like great houses available in New Bedford, Massachusetts, for example. There are lots of benefits of being very downtown and right next to MIT, but there are also benefits in having more space. So I think there's just a lot of trade-offs, but it's a problem that we're very actively attacking as an administration.
In the back there, in the middle.
Does the Mass CEC have sort of any programs in place to become more of a facilitator between like startups and already established climate companies? For example, I imagine that a lot of startups could benefit from the insight and data that like GE Vernova could provide on like products that they're trying to develop.
I'm wondering if Jen might want to say something about that. Again, this is Jen LeBlond, who is our emerging climate tech managing director. So she runs the programs that are doing exactly that.
The short answer is yes. So we have just recently stood up a program where we're matching project partners, and that includes industry in that. So they are expressing their industry problems and matching those, curating startups to match to address those, and providing funding to back those demonstration projects. I think actually an artifact of standing up this particular program has been that we've created a platform for industry to really start talking to the startups as well. So we're going to see this proliferate, I think, and grow legs as an artifact of the money that was injected as part of MASSES. But we're very cognizant that there is a push and a pull factor, and that pull factor from the industry side is incredibly important to bring things to market.
On the side here?
Hi.
There's a microphone there.
Hello. Wonderful. I'm wondering about knowledge sharing, specifically across the U.S. So I know NYSERDA, MASSES, California Energy Commission, are the leaders in this space. I'm wondering how much you interface with other states that are trying to grow these initiatives or these types of initiatives, and what specifically you're doing, maybe specific areas that you're doing that in.
We collaborate with New York quite frequently. I'd say there's less of an entity that's exactly like what we do in California, but in New York, I would say we collaborate on everything from transmission. So how does electricity, the backbone work as we get through the entire Northeast corridor. We collaborate on offshore wind. So a lot of the various projects, we try to think of ways that we can lower overall costs by banding 3 states together in terms of the number of megawatts that we're asking for to lower costs. On innovation, I would say we definitely have, I don't know if it's quarterly, but it's a quarterly meeting where we are sharing kind of what we're doing. So I think that the relationship with New York is quite tight. The California one, I would say that we certainly have contacts there, but it's not quite as tight just because of the geography makes us need to collaborate with New York in a lot of different ways just because we're sort of co-located.
Is there anything in other states?
There's quite a bit going on in other states. There's not an entity like us per se, but I mean New Jersey, offshore wind, Virginia, offshore wind. Out in Colorado, I would say there's a lot of activity going on in terms of wind and grid innovation. Texas is huge because they got their own grid, so that's really handy to do experiments, and they're willing to do them. So I'd say different parts of the country have different strengths and different opportunities for innovation. But yeah, it's not all here in Massachusetts. We just, again, economic development, I want you to stay here, so I'm going to
Just the best
argue.
officer.
We're just the best.
In the back there? Yeah.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for being here. I know a ton of people who benefited from the MASSES benefits. But I have a question. I'm working with faculty Phil Thompson on this model around a civic virtual power plant, which is essentially is a community-owned utility that is supported by a local workforce. And we're working on a pilot in the South Bronx. And uniquely, New York just passed the FERC order, which actually allows virtual power plants or distributed energy resources to access energy markets in a way that the rest of the country hasn't seen. And I was just wondering if you see any of that type of legislation in the pipeline here in Massachusetts. I also support the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, which is a community land trust that is looking for a similar model to really try to mitigate against the very predatory behaviors of investor-owned utilities. So you mentioned you collaborate with New York often. Could you share any conversations actively around kind of emulating that model?
That's a really good question, and one I'd probably have to take back to the team that works on that. It's actually another part of kind of the energy infrastructure within the administration. But I believe that there is provision for virtual power plants in the there's affordability and innovation bill the governor passed, or the governor submitted, I should say, earlier this spring. So I can probably follow up with you and give you some more information on that. But I've definitely heard a lot of talking. I mean, there's been a lot of conversations about virtual power plants, but I just have to look into a little bit more about where it is right now.
Great. Right here.
So I most recently was working for the federal government. I was at OSED at the Department of Energy, so very familiar with how a lot of that funding has dried up. And recently there was a report that came out that was interviewing a lot of the employees at the various DOE departments, and they said that one of the reasons they struggled to move as quickly was because there were just too many priorities. There were, they were looking at emissions reductions and community benefits and jobs and national security, and so I'm just curious how you think about prioritizing all of those different priorities.
Yeah, I would say that's a very hard thing. That having spent my life kind of on the private sector side, coming into government the last 2 years, there are always so many trade-offs and different perspectives that you are always having to, different audiences, different people that have an interest in what you're doing. And so it's true that things just take longer in that environment because you represent a state, or in your case, a country. You don't want to leave people out, but that means that things take longer. So I'm just going to agree with you rather than say that we have I think we at Mass CEC, given who we are the innovation people. We try to move things forward as quickly as possible. But like if you start a new program, there's just a lot to consider when you're putting that out there, even how you phrase things that you want to be careful of to be able to reach as many people as possible who could benefit from that particular grant program.
And I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and ask maybe the last question. I know this year has been moderately depressing for many people in clean energy world. And I was wondering if you could leave us with an optimistic view of why we should be happy and positive that this is really going to work.
Well, I just have to look at what's going on globally. I mean, the rest of the world is going in this direction. So, we can decide not to compete as a country, or we can decide that we want to compete, we want to be part of the future. And I think ultimately we will get there. Yes, there's going to be some slowing in the next couple years, but that doesn't mean that no solar is going to get installed, or no wind is going to happen, or no heat pumps are going to get installed, that technology and innovation isn't going to happen in this sector, because it is. This industry is rolling forward. Where the markets are may be in a different place. They might be in Europe. They might be in Asia. They might particularly be in China. So, I guess climate change isn't going anywhere. Innovation isn't going anywhere. And I think when you have places like MIT who are very focused on climate innovation, the energy transition, that activity helps move the ball forward, even in a time particularly like this. But if I was out there starting a career today, I guess I would try not to be so worried about the headlines, but just look at what's around you and realize that there are a lot of people that care a lot about climate change and clean energy and making that happen, and they are still there. They have not gone anywhere, but you don't get that in the headlines.
And we're right here, right now, so thank you very much. So this is our last speaker for the fall semester, but we'll have several very good speakers coming up in the spring. Stay tuned. Please follow MITEI on social media, and you can see our Energy of the Future video campaign that tells the stories of MIT students who are the energy leaders of the future, working on their energy transition research today. And I want to ask everyone, there's food downstairs in the lobby on the first floor. Please come on downstairs and join us, and I think Emily will stay around for a few minutes to answer some questions. Thank you.